of Government Affairs at Penn Future.
Thank you, Michael. This is Ezra Thrust, the Director of Government Affairs with Penn Future. We are the state affiliate for the National Wildlife Federation. We're based in Harrisburg, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, up in Monroe County, and also we just opened up an office in Erie just before the pandemic started last year. So we have an office all over the state. We work on clean air, clean water, clean energy issues. And my role at Penn Future is to serve as the policy liaison with the legislature, with the governor's office, and the executive branch agencies. So Penn Future, we work on a lot of issues, predominantly lobbying on the environmental and energy issues, making sure that we clean up our Chesapeake Bay watershed. And I'm just really eager to hear what other great ideas folks have here tonight. And Representative Sturla and staff, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good to see you both here. And that's it. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Ezra. And if you're just hopping on again, thank you very much for joining. This is the meet and greet with Representative Mike Sturla, and we are recording this event. Katie, would you mind explaining conservation voters of PA?
Certainly. My name is Katie Bloom. I'm the political director for Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania. And Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, we are affiliated with the National League of Conservation Voters. So what we do is we look for and hopefully elect elected leaders at all levels of government who are pro-environment and want to enact great environmental policy. We also hold our elected officials, our lawmakers accountable through things like our scorecard. And you can actually find the state legislative scorecard for the 19 to 2020 session at scorecard.conservationpa.org. We will have a new scorecard coming out. We also do accountability work like marcellusmoney.org, which tracks fossil fuel spending to elected officials at the state level. Thank you, Jess, for dropping that link in the chat. It's a great tool when you want to look up some legislators. And we hold our folks accountable, and we keep working to pass policy with our friends at Penn Future and other organizations and coalitions around the state. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Katie. Appreciate Jess dropping all the great information in the chat. And we're really excited now to introduce Representative Mike Sturla. Representative Mike Sturla he serves the 96th House District, which includes Lancaster City, as well as the townships of Lancaster and Manheim. He's been a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives since 1991, so a whole host of experience that we're excited to hear about. Representative Sturla has also served as the House Democratic Policy Committee Chair, served on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and sits on the Climate Caucus, the Bipartisan Climate Caucus. Lastly, Representative Sturla has been a consistent environmental champion. The Pennsylvania Environmental Scorecard that Katie had just mentioned, in the most recent edition, Representative Sturla earned a perfect 100% score for the 2019-2020 session. So we're super excited to have Representative Mike Sturla join us to talk about his environmental policies. I will say he's going to talk about that, but I encourage everyone, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make, feel free to put them in the chat. And after Representative Sturla talks about his priorities, we'll go through the questions and have a great Q&A period. So without further ado, Representative Sturla, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Recently I was asked to describe a little bit about why I was interested in environmental issues. And I talked about the fact that as a kid, I grew up near the headwaters of the Conestoga. And I don't think there was a week went by that I wasn't in that water some way, shape, or form, even in the wintertime sometimes, whether it was skating on top of the water or whether it was looking for animals around there or playing in the stream and catching crawdads and that kind of stuff. So that was one of those things that was just sort of ingrained in me as a kid, that was a great laboratory. I went on to school to get a degree in environmental design. And so a lot of my focus all my life has been about the built environment and how it works with the natural environment. I am currently a member of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. As you pointed out, I think I've had consistently somewhere between a 90 and 95 and 100% voting record on environmental issues. So it's one of those things, like if it's not 100%, I go, what happened? What vote did I miss? Where was something wrong? I think it's something that's been part of my life. I mean, my daughter and my son-in-law both work for the World Wildlife Fund. My other daughter and her husband work for Tesla. So we're constantly talking about environmental issues and how we move forward into the future. In terms of legislation, this year, again, I'm going to reintroduce a bill that will prevent livestock in streams. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, there's a law that actually prohibits local municipalities from limiting livestock in streams. I think we should be able to say that they're limited to cattle crossings and things like that, so that we can keep them out of the streams, and it's actually safer for livestock and more healthy for livestock, and it's healthier for the streams also. There's some new legislation I want to introduce, which is to require a conservation plan for any property that's in Growing Greener. It is law in Pennsylvania that all agricultural lands have a conservation plan, and yet about 50% of the agricultural land that's in Growing Greener, which those people are getting a tax break for that, and thank goodness they're putting their land into Growing Greener, but they're getting tax credits and don't even have a conservation plan. So I want to require that. I also want to look at an issue that we've talked about on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, which deals with PFAS. The foam that's used in firefighting contains PFAS. And while we still want to allow that chemical to be used in the foam during actual firefighting events, there's more training that goes on than there are firefighting events. And there are other states that have passed laws that says the training foam can't contain the PFAS. And you get the same type of, it reacts exactly the same way in terms of the operations of that foam. It's just that it does not leave a chemical trace then later in that with that harmful chemical. So I'll be looking to introduce that. There's an environmental justice bill that has passed in several states. And I want to look at doing one in Pennsylvania, because I think that representing an urban community, it really is important that we make sure that a lot of the environmental issues adversely affect communities like mine, and we don't get the credit for or the dollars to do things to mitigate that. There's also, I want to look into a bill on carbon capture credits, particularly as it relates to farmland, because we know that there's some legislation to deal with forest land. I think we can actually get some farmers buy-in if we start giving them some carbon capture credits for appropriately doing things with their land also. And then finally, the bill that I've been working on for several sessions now. Last session, I was trying to get a Republican prime sponsor, and we worked on the bill the entire session and never got it introduced. Is a water fee bill, and that legislation essentially goes something like this: the only resource that Pennsylvanians as a state, as a commonwealth, as all the citizens of Pennsylvania own, is the water of Pennsylvania. We don't own the gas under the state. That's private development rights. We don't own the coal under the state. That's private rights. We don't own, all those other natural resources in the state of Pennsylvania, but we do own the water. And if somebody wants to take some of that water, we allow them, as long as they register with the Department of Environmental Protection, if they're going to take more than 10,000 gallons a day for more than a 30-day period. And so we already have people registered that are taking more than 10,000 gallons a day. And we're glad that they register, but we don't charge them a dime for that water. And as a result, there are if you don't count what municipal water systems are taking, if you don't count what agriculture uses, there's still between 8 and 9 billion gallons of water a day taken from the waters of Pennsylvania for free. And we don't charge a dime for it. Now, I don't even want to charge a dime. I'm suggesting that if somebody takes the water and keeps it, puts it in a bottle and sells it to somebody, that we charge them 1/10 of 1 cent per gallon. And if they take the water and wash potatoes with it and then put it back in the stream, they've altered that water, but they at least put it back, and that those people should pay 1/100th of a cent per gallon for the water. That would generate about $385 million a year. Or if we wanted to use that to finance a bond issue, we could do about a $6 billion bond issue that would be used strictly for water. And all those dollars would go back into the watershed where they were generated. So no one can say, oh, this is just a bailout for somebody else. This is about using the water that we own as a resource to help clean the water that we are having to put up with as a result of people dumping things in, bad practices in the past, legacy sediment, acid mine drainage, all those things that we try and deal with in the state of Pennsylvania. This would be a dedicated funding source to help make sure that the water in Pennsylvania, which is our, I believe, most precious resource, has a funding source to make sure that it stays clean forever. So I'll end there and open it up for questions or comments or anything from people.
Thank you so much, Representative Stirla, for that really detailed list of legislative priorities. We really appreciate that you did your homework, and it shows. One thing, we have a pretty educated, smart audience, I would imagine, with environmental policy, but there might be a couple things like growing greener. Would you mind describing what that is for folks that may not be aware?
Yeah, growing greener, I keep getting them mixed up because growing greener is different than, what's the one that says you get the farmland preservation? Basically, you can avoid taxes.
I think our colleagues, Katie and Ezra, could help.
Yeah. Sorry for interjecting. Rep. Stirla, this is Ezra. I believe that's the Clean and Green program.
Clean and Green. So I keep calling it Growing Greener, but it's Clean and Green. Yeah. So this is the conservation plan requirement to be in Growing Greener. I said it's actually the conservation plan to be in Clean and Green, requiring a conservation plan to be in Clean and Green. I misspoke, and I caught myself mentally, but I could not get out of it.
No, Representative Stirla, I feel bad. That was honestly not a gotcha question. I was just honestly curious because, but thank you again for that explanation.
Sure.
One question I saw in the chat was from Steve, where he said, hi, Rep. Stirla, given the inordinate influence the fossil fuel and petrochemical industries have on policymaking at all levels of government in PA, largely involving the influence their campaign money has on elections, what do you think is the best way to address that?
Well, I think through education. I mean, look, you saw what just happened in Texas, and they blamed it on the Green New Deal, which isn't in effect and is not, Texas isn't even part of the national grid. They rely very heavily on fossil fuels. And when their system failed, they said, oh, it's because of those darn environmental guys, you know. Well, I think there's people that are pushing back on that and saying, no, it was actually other reasons. And, you know, you guys have a really bad system there. But also, I think, like, I read an article recently where, you know, the promise of jobs and a revitalized economy in the Marcellus Shale area has just not come to fruition. And I've often said, you know, the Marcellus Shale industry, which, look, I will go probably, I'll probably infuriate some people here. I actually think we should be taking advantage of the fact that we have all that Marcellus shale gas and use it to transition to cleaner energy. I think we need to transition a lot faster. I don't want to wait until we run out of Marcellus shale gas, because we won't for 100 years, you know, but I think we can transition a lot faster. But in the meantime, if I'm not burning coal and I'm burning gas, I'll take it as a temporary till I can get everything to wind and solar and other renewables and you know, hydroelectric and you know, atomic energy and all the other things. But having said that, they keep touting, the industry keeps touting themselves as, you know, look, we've done X amount of, you know, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes and economic development in the state of Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania does more than they do in a year. The entire industry, University of Pennsylvania, does more economic generation for Pennsylvania than the entire Marcellus shale industry. I mean, we just have to start pointing out that this idea that somehow they're going to save the state. Well, then let's invest as much in the University of Pennsylvania, because, gosh, they do even more, you know? And last time I checked, they're a non-smokestack industry, you know? So part of this, I think, is just taking away the myth that exists. You know, I'll liken it to the fact that almost everybody agrees incorrectly that agriculture is the number one business in Pennsylvania. And part of that is because agriculture claims that everything that is in any way, shape, or form related to food is agriculture. So when the chip company ships chips across the state, the truck driving across the state is agriculture. And when somebody goes out to eat in a restaurant, they're eating food, therefore it's agriculture. And so they're claiming that everything that you do, wherever you touch food, is agriculture, and therefore they're the number one industry. I come from Lancaster County. I represent the city of Lancaster, but I come from Lancaster County. When you ask the Chamber of Commerce where agriculture ranks on their list of, you know, industries, it's like in the 30s. It doesn't even rank in the top 10. And that's in Lancaster County, our most agricultural county in the entire state of Pennsylvania. So part of this, again, is just sort of explaining to people, it's not that I'm against agriculture. It's not that I'm against some of the things that the fossil fuel industry is doing or does, but just don't make things up. Don't paint a different scenario than actually exists. Don't tell me that if I go to wind and solar that I'm going to freeze all winter long, because I'm not. You know? And so I think part of this is just that we have to push back at every time that there's misinformation out there. We need to push back with accurate information and keep repeating that accurate information. And we get tired of hearing it because, heck, we know it's true, but they don't get tired of repeating the lie. And so I think we need to be more vigilant about repeating the truth.
Thank you so much, Representative Sterla. Next question we have, let me pull it up, is from Tony, who, it's good seeing you, Tony. He said, the recent challenge to truth in relation to our democracy and our vote has parallels to the denial of truth in relation to climate science. How do you think we can bolster our democracy across party lines, as well as make progress on climate change through promoting truth?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is, I think we have to just keep speaking truth. But it is, I must say, in my lifetime, I went from, Walter Cronkite and David Huntley and, people delivering the news at night in an unbiased fashion, but they were simply reporting facts. And then they let me take from that and, figure out how I wanted to spin it. But they reported facts. We now, so much of the time, have information that gets spun to us that I saw a thing the other day where it said, middle-class people actually paid less as a proportion of the total taxes that the IRS collected as a result of the Trump tax cuts. Now, that sounds like, gosh, the middle class got a bigger tax break than the uber wealthy. Well, the reality is the uber wealthy earned 10 times as much as a result of that tax cut. So they actually paid more at a lesser rate. And the middle class and poor, who were stagnant in their wages, got a slight tax cut temporarily, and so they paid less. So it looks like the wealthy really paid more. Well, no, the wealthy just got richer. The rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And so, again, it's how some of this information gets interpreted. But at least if I can agree that that was a fact, then I can argue about how I interpret that fact. In the last few years, we've seen people talk about alternative facts. Like there's some facts that are facts and there's other facts that are alternatives to that. And then they can't be facts, I'm starting to see social media starting to clean up their act a little bit in terms of just anybody can say anything. But I know, and this was, earlier on with Wikipedia, where, the part of the Wikipedia content was based on user input. And so if you went and looked up the city of Lancaster, they talked about the fact that the reason that the school district had a high dropout rate was because Amish kids don't go to school past 8th grade. And so it looked like the city had a high dropout rate because of all the Amish kids in Lancaster. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there's not a single Amish kid that goes to the school district of Lancaster. But that was being touted as factual information. And when you'd go in and try and correct it, they would be like, well, you have no right to correct that. That's just your opinion. Well, it wasn't my opinion. It was fact. And so I think at some point in time, we're going to have to start teaching critical thought at, in kindergarten, so that people can start to discern what is fact and what is just somebody's opinion. And I think there's a whole lot of people that don't know how to do that right now, because they believe that anything they hear must be fact, otherwise they wouldn't hear it.
Thank you, Representative Sterla. The next question is from Tim, where he said, what more can the federal government do for PFAS cleanup besides fund the Department of Defense to help with the cleanup? And I'll add, beyond that, what sort of actions would you like to see the federal government provide to assist Pennsylvania with its environmental protection?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think the feds obviously need to be doing a lot of that through their Defense Department, because that's where we see like the one site down Willow Grove, I think it is, outside of Philadelphia, is the water's contaminated in that whole area because of the airstrip that was there. And so, there's a lot of cleanup that needs to be done from this issue. I was reminded the other day, I was down on the Chesapeake Bay, and I saw 7 bald eagles in 2 trees that were side by side at the same time. And I can remember when, because of DDT, there was a possibility that I would never see a bald eagle again in my life. And, we took action, and we banned the chemical, and we did cleanup, and we did, and we did an all-out effort because it was our national symbol. There's a tendency with issues like this to say, well, we'll eventually get around to it. Just, can you cover it over? Can you keep people away from it temporarily? And, look, we've got a whole lot of work we can do in these United States that will create good paying jobs and make our environment cleaner and make our standard of living higher if we just invest in it. And the PFAS issue is one of those. How they go about it beyond the Defense Department, I'll take money in any way, shape, or form that the feds want to send. But we don't even have a recognizable program in the state of Pennsylvania to deal with it. So that's where I'm starting, is to say, let's at least get a recognizable program. Then I can go to the, feds and say, now will you help us start the cleanup? But I want to stop doing the harm that we're still doing.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative, the next question is from Ad. Says, Representative Sterling, you have been pushing the Pennsylvania Water Resources Act for 4 years. What has been the opposition to it, and what will it take to get widespread support?
Well, I mean, the last term where I thought I had a Republican that was willing to prime sponsor it for me, it was always like, well, is that the right rate that it should be? Should it be? And my response has been, I don't care if it's 1/100th of a cent, or if it's 0.0089%, or whether it's 0.12, or what I want is this notion that we set up a dedicated fund. Now, what I don't want to do is start out at such a ridiculously low amount that we're setting up a whole program and generating $20 million a year and trying to spread that across the state, because basically I take up 10 million in figuring out how to administer the program, and I have nothing left. The thing that I think it's going to take is, and I've actually gotten a little bit more traction. Like the feds came in and said, hey, you need to do something with Alcosan, which is the Allegheny County solid waste sanitation department out there. And it's expected that that's going to cost them about $3 billion. We've said, how do we clean up the Susquehanna watershed so that we're not polluting the Chesapeake and we're meeting our obligations with the pact that we've signed with other states? And that's going to cost about $3 billion. And if you go into the Delaware watershed, they're looking at how do we deal with stormwater issues and 1,000 other things. And that's a couple $2 billion. At some point in time, somebody needs to understand that this doesn't get solved with a $10 million a year program. You might have your problem solved 300 or 400 years from now if it stayed static. But a $10 million or $20 million a year program basically doesn't even let you keep up with treading water. You keep sinking a little deeper every year. it may require that the legislature changes in order for it to happen, because there seems to be this sense, at least with the majority, that if you say you're going to raise a fee or a tax or anything like that, it's dead on arrival. Now, they were willing to do the one Marcellus Shale fee because they called it a fee and not a tax. And that's why this is not a tax on water. This is a fee for excessive use, which I define as 10,000 gallons a day or more. The average household in the state of Pennsylvania uses about 100 gallons of water. We're talking about people that are taking 10,000 gallons a day, not 100 gallons, 10,000 gallons. So somebody that's taking 100 times what the average family does should then pay a really nominal fee. I mean, if you're taking 10,000 gallons and you're paying 1/100th of a cent per gallon, it's going to cost you an extra $1 a day to operate your business that you used 10,000 gallons of water for. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask. So again, part of this is just going to be an educational process where I sit down with members of the legislature and say, hear me out. And if at the end of it you say $1 a day is way more than any business should be required to pay, they should just have free access to as much water as they want, doesn't matter, then we don't have much to talk about. But if on the other hand you can say, but your local community can actually put in a water treatment plant, your local community can actually do stream bank fencing for farmers, your local community can actually do a clean water plant. You can do these things if everybody just pays a tiny amount. And it's sort of the like grocery stores operate on a 1% markup. How could anybody operate on a 1% markup? It's because their volume is so high, and they know that people are going to come back and buy again and again and again and again. I know those people are going to come back and use this water again and again and again and again. And the volume is so high, 8 to 9 billion gallons a day, that I can pretty much count on the fact that revenue source is going to be there, and I can make it really low fee rate so that people don't say, you're going to put me out of business. If anybody's going to go out of business because I'm now charging them $1 a day, then they have a pretty shaky business model in my mind.
Cool. Thank you so much, Representative Sterla. I think the next question I want to ask is from Beth, where she asked, can you please address the petrochemical plants in Southwest PA and the impacts that the transfer of gas and production of plastic has on the health of Pennsylvanians? I read in the Pittsburgh Gazette that the Shell plant is permitted to discharge more volatile organic compounds or VOCs and particulates than any other facility. Why is that, and what can we do to push it back?
Yeah, well, I think this gets into, and I voted against that, and there were a lot of people in my caucus from that area who voted for it, and they were like, how dare you, don't you understand, this means jobs, this means, that the industry can thrive and things like that. What's interesting is that with the gas, the shale gas that we have in Pennsylvania, if you go up into the northeastern part of the state, they have what's called dry gas, which was originally thought to be the most valuable stuff because you can take it right out of the ground and put it in a pipe and, cook with it on your stove. The gas that's in the southwestern part of the state is what they call wet gas, and it has a bunch of other chemical compounds on it. And so they actually have to do some things with it and fracture the molecules in order to get it to the point where there's some dry gas. And then there's what they had originally thought was waste components. Turns out those waste components are worth more than the gas itself. And so that's why the Southwest has seen this boom in gas production, but those byproducts are also very toxic. They're the kinds of things that you make plastics out of, and the kinds of things you do a lot of other things with. And so a lot of that stuff prior to the cracker plant in the western part of the state were only going on in Louisiana. And we all know how lax their regulations are. So we now have that situation. There was an attempt to try and create a credit for another one of those types of plants in the state of Pennsylvania without even having anybody that said they wanted to do it. We just wanted to try and entice somebody to do it. Again, I voted against that. I don't know that now that the horse is out of the barn, we can ever put them back in. But I think we can make sure that DEP has the ability to make sure there's as many scrubbers as possible, that there's as little leakage as possible, that, all the things that if we actually, and unfortunately, we never got around to it, but when we first did a Marcellus shale fee, I was an advocate for having part of that go to an environmental stewardship fund. Because if you look historically in Pennsylvania, whenever our natural resources have been exploited, there's always been devastation later on that we had to deal with, and that came out of the taxpayers' pockets. Coal being the prime example. We spend millions of dollars every year cleaning up coal projects that are no longer existent and are bankrupt, but cause acid mine drainage and things like that. So I really still believe that it's still not too late, because Marcellus shale gas will be with us for another 50 years, to start saying at some point in time you have to use that resource to pay for any of the detrimental impacts that it's going to have either today or 50 years from now or 100 years from now. And you put it into a fund that is restricted for that use. Now, we have a bad habit of then going and raiding those funds, but I'd at least like to have the fund to raid rather than to say, when all those disastrous things happen, we don't even have a way to pay for it. We're just stuck now.
Thank you so much, Representative. So the next question is actually from our partners at CASA, and they asked if they could ask their question without being muted. So Jose Diaz, do you mind unmuting yourself?
Yeah, hello, thank you everybody, and thank you again to Mr. Sterla. I'll try to be as brief as possible. You gave me 2 minutes, so let me start here. It's about RGGI. RGGI, we understand, is a market-oriented alternative that prioritizes profits, earnings, and losses. We need to be skeptics concerning the effectiveness of the program. Is it going to be another market-based scheme to guarantee profitable money transactions as final carbon emissions is obtained, or is it going to be a never-ending game? In the meantime, the clock is ticking, and there is no guarantee that environmental justice reaches every corner of Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, and the rest of the planet. We understand that by 2022, this program supposedly is going to be rolling, and make sure that we're going to be spearheading the causes of the weakest links of this society, the poor and the migrants. So we have what I will call a key ambitious agenda that should be addressed as part of environmental justice, starting with pandemic mitigation, migration, affordable safe housing, health services, accessible education, detention of urban sprawl, suspension of fracking, coal extraction and coal plants, reforestation of urban low-income communities, especially in Lancaster County and Mayhem Township, where I reside, forestation of all available land, protection of waterways from erosion and stormwater runoff, no more big Conestoga crossings, protection and improvement of water quality in all waterways, especially the Conestoga Creek, the Conestoga River, and the Susquehanna River. And I had before 2 questions to Mr. Sterla is, what steps you understand should be taken to use the monies that supposedly are coming from RGGI to act upon these things, because we have to see environment protection in terms of environmental justice. To whom are we going to benefit? Because guess what? These people, they don't see that the clock is ticking. And we are having a plastic bag around our heads. And they realize that they are accept of that. But the people that are in the most need, the people that create the wealth of the state and the country, are the ones that really are paying the price. The people that are suffering from fracking, water contamination, bad air, and the effect of methane in the atmosphere, because they sell fracking ice less of an impact. Fracking consumes a lot of carbon in the processing. Those things have to be observed, and there are strong interests controlling the American policies in my island, Puerto Rico, where they come with the same excuse of transition, and that we understand is totally false. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, for starters, maybe we can get together and talk about the environmental justice bill that I wanted to introduce, because I'm in the process of developing it. I'm using models from other states, and we can see how that works here in the state of Pennsylvania. So I'd be happy to sit down and do that. Awesome. The Reggie still has a long way to go, so I wouldn't consider it done yet. I do think that it has a lot of potential in terms of trying to get us transitioned to, a non-fossil fuels. But again, the devil's in the details, and we haven't seen all the details yet. So there's still a long way to go on that. And so I think the appropriate thing is that we need to continue to have some discussions, and I'd be more than happy to sit down with you and talk about all that. So.
Thank you very much, Representative Sterla. One question I'd like to ask, February is Black History Month, and I think that brings into mind the concern over environmental justice. So in your district, who are the folks that are most vulnerable and impacted by environmental injustice? And what can be done to help them?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what I see as the biggest impact right now. If a child in the city of Lancaster is more than 3 times more likely to have lead poisoning than a child in Flint, Michigan. Now, that's not because we have lead pipes. It's because our entire housing stock was built 100 years ago. That is the case in almost every urban area in the state of Pennsylvania. And particularly persons of color live at a higher percentage rate in urban areas than they do in rural and suburban areas. And so immediately you start out with the fact that the housing that people of color live in has a higher percentage of lead than any other constituency. And so how do we mitigate that? I've been working with the city that's trying to do some things, and the Lancaster General Hospital here in Lancaster that has a program to look at lead mitigation, as well as the state. I think there are 2 things that need to be done. One, right now, if I'm a landlord and I'm renting, I have to certify that I don't know that there's any lead contamination. Well, as long as I never get my place tested, I can certify that I never know there's any lead contamination. So a landlord is not required to get any testing done, and the city's not required to do any testing, and the state doesn't pay for any testing. And, I remember 25 years ago talking to the chief planner of the state of Maryland, and he showed me a map where they could show me every property in the city of Baltimore that had high lead levels. That was 25 years ago. We don't even check for it in the state of Pennsylvania. And so first thing I think we need to do is start saying that, look, when we do housing inspections and things like that, you do a simple swipe and you do a lead test, and that there's not going to be a mandate that you now go spend $25,000 the next day to rid that place of all the lead, but you at least are required to notify anybody that's living there that there is lead in that place. Now, there's people that say, well, but that'll be discriminatory because now people of color won't be able to find housing. People with kids won't be able to find housing. Look, there are a whole lot of landlords that would do the right thing if they knew that they could and should, and that there were some funds available. We can set up funds. There's a couple of people that have legislation that would put a 50-cent tax on a gallon of paint. You can't buy paint with lead in it anymore, but the reason that there's lead in all these places is because somebody painted it with lead at one point in time. So think about how many gallons of paint, walk into a Home Depot and watch how many gallons of paint go walking out the door in a day. Now think about an extra 50 cents. I mean, I'm already paying $35 for a gallon of paint. If I have to pay $35.50 for a gallon of paint so that some kid doesn't get lead poisoning, I think it's well worth it. And so again, it's a matter of trying to make sure that there's funds available so that people can do the responsible thing and do the cleanups. There's also things that, I don't think you need to declare that a place is completely lead free. If there was lead paint painted on the ceiling at one point in time and it's not peeling and it's covered up with something else, I don't know of any kids that are crawling on the ceiling and coming in contact with lead paint because it's encapsulated and it's on the ceiling. If it's on the baseboard or the windowsill, I want to make sure we get rid of it completely because that's where the kid's going to come in contact with it. So there are ways to do partial mitigation of those kinds of things also. But that to me, that whole lead issue is the biggest environmental justice issue that there is right now, that is because of its impact on communities of color, and the cost of mitigating it is huge.
Thank you very much, Representative Sterling. Thanks for all the great questions. We're coming close to the end, so we're only going to do 2 more questions. But if you are interested in if we didn't get to your question, we'll make sure to share Representative Sterling's contact information because these have been really great, detailed questions, and we really appreciate it. So the penultimate question we have is that we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Pennsylvania Environmental Amendment, which is a pretty unique thing to have an amendment in your state constitution that is all about ensuring the rights to clean air, pure water, et cetera. So knowing that, and since you've been a representative of the state for such a period, what does having that amendment mean to you? And what do you think it can mean going forward?
Well, to me, it means a lot more than it does to a lot of my colleagues. And I think we need to really emphasize that some of our colleagues, through their actions, are violating the Constitution every day. In terms of the policies that they want to push and the things they want to promote. And, so I look back and I go, gosh, in the 70s, when we started to realize that the environment was a precious thing, that we had degraded to a point where rivers were on fire and, bald eagles were nearly extinct. And, we woke up. And then we said, okay, we're going to do something about this. And then as soon as we said, okay, well, see, look, we said we're going to do something about it there if we're done. No. I mean, we had 50 years worth of, catching up to do to get back to where we should have been. And then before that, you had the Industrial Revolution. I mean, we got 100 years worth of doing the wrong thing that we still need to figure out how to catch up on to start doing the right thing. And I think that people said, well, that was a fun thing to do in the 70s. We were environmentally conscious for 5 years. And so now we're done. No, we're not. We took a tiny baby step, and we've got a long way to go.
Thank you very much, Representative Sterla. And the last question is actually for Tony Israel, who unfortunately had to leave a little early to take care of his son, but he asked a lot of great questions in the chat. And so we wanted to end on a question that he offered, which is, with the environment and the state that it is, and with climate change upon us, what are the best ways for each of us on this call to help push for the environmental protections we know we need?
Well, what I've found is that if I just talk about factual information and I'm not accusatory of the fact that maybe my colleague doesn't believe in science, or maybe they don't believe in climate change, or maybe they don't, I'm much better if I ask them a question like, have you noticed when you're going fishing that the bass have lesions on them? Or have you noticed when you go to the bay that the water is about a foot higher than it used to be? Or have you noticed when you that the weather patterns are really weird? And they'll usually go, yeah, I have noticed that. Well, now I've got them to say yes, instead of, if I say, you know what, we've polluted the water so bad that the fish have lesions. They go, no, now don't exaggerate. Now, they've observed it too, but they've observed that maybe 9 out of 10 fish don't. So there I am, I'm saying that all fish have. No, I never said that, but that's how that gets interpreted. So part of this, I think, is to get people that may otherwise be opposed or averse to doing something about it to start admitting that they're seeing tiny little changes also. And that if I can get them to acknowledge that, maybe I can get them to make tiny changes. That is like landslide kind of stuff, because right now I say, how bad things are, and they go, no, it's not. And they've already dug their heels in, and I'm never going to move them from that position at that point in time. And so part of this is to bring us all along together to say, look, this is going to benefit everyone. It's like with the legislation I'm looking at for carbon capture for farmers. I don't have a single farmer in my district, but if I can get them to help and get them to get a tax credit on it, and get them to buy into the fact that their soil actually does do something to help benefit the environment, wow, that's a huge step forward. As opposed to, you can't make me do something, okay, So I really think that we have to never let our foot off the pedal. I'm not saying don't say that all this stuff exists, and don't be as ferocious about being an environmental warrior, but do it in a way that gets them to be a warrior with you. So that would be my advice.
Thank you so much for the advice, and thank you for answering all the questions, and to everyone for giving your time this evening and for all the great questions. Again, if there's a question we didn't get to, feel free to contact Representative Sterla's office or ours. I'm sure our folks will be linking that into the chat. And before folks go, just a few more things to let you know, because the conversation does not stop here. There's always more we need to be doing. We actually have another great upcoming environmental event at the end of the month. It will be this Tuesday, February 23rd. Both Ezra and Katie, who introduced Penn Future and Conservation Voters of PA, will be given an environmental legislative briefing to go into a deeper dive of the budget and the bills moving forward for the 2021 legislative session. We're on social media. Both Penn Future and Conservation Voters of PA have Twitter, and we also have a Conservation Voters activist group where folks throughout the Commonwealth share articles, talk about events, and we're really trying to build a movement of environmentalists throughout the state. And that should be linked in the chat as well. And then finally, we have an ACE team with Penn Future. Tony is one, Tess, who's on the call, she's another one. These are folks that want to take the time to meet with their legislators to, as Representative Sterla mentioned, move them gradually and through conversation to see the environmental point of view, and to talk about the important legislation initiatives that will impact them and their communities. So thank you very much. Again, this event was recorded and that will be sent to everyone. Really appreciate the conversation, and take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question for the host. Is there an email for Rep. Sterla?
Yeah, let me go get that.
Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, I really appreciate Costa's precipitation, Kyle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just asked last minute to jump in, but I mean, it was a great event. I really was glad to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. That's a big relief on my shoulders for sure.
And no, you